want to thank everybody for coming. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us today. I really want to thank Dave Highland for helping me out. He's been a savior. He provided some space for us, gave us some time here. We were originally trying to set up for at the museum at the ballpark, but being so close to opening day, they're just swamped and they really didn't have time to deal with it. So we can try to do the meeting down there maybe another time. This year, SABR Day didn't really work out for either of us to try to get together. So that's why we decided to hold off a little bit and let you guys maybe attend some of the other local meetings, and then we could meet today. So let's see, get that out of the way. Did anybody go to any of the SABR Day?
I did. I went to Louisville.
Did you go live or?
I went live. I drove to Louisville. Yeah.
Okay. How was that?
It was really good. It's always at the Louisville Slugger Museum, so they kind of have an advantage, if you will. Yeah. The Slugger Museum's always been good to them. I went the last 2 years. The Louisville Bats have also always been good to them, so they always have a speaker from the Bats there. Some years they had a poet. I think I've gone 2, so I might mix a couple of them. But it's usually a mixture of speeches. At one point, because they have an ability to do film screenings down there, they actually had like a person who had done a documentary on the Cleveland Buckeyes show a film. So they vary. The talks are very varied. It's not just like monotone talk after monotone talk. Like it's kind of multimedia, if you will, as much as they can try to do that. So having like film and poetry and a speech and sometimes graphic art and always trivia, which I'm terrible at, so I don't go for that because I would flunk out of that every single time. But yeah, so that was not bad. It's a drive. It's an hour and 40 minutes or something. Yeah. So it's not a no investment. It's pretty much. I think I left at like 7 in the morning and got back at 2. But not bad. And they do Zoom meetings. Like they try to do it once a month. So they're pretty active. I give them a lot of credit in that they're a very active SABR chapter. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, they even for this year are getting like the Negro League conference in Louisville, the SABR Negro League conference. Yes, they managed to. Yeah, it's in August. So they're not that's not like they're a huge group. There's like 20 maybe, but they're pretty active. So yeah, I'll give them their props. So I'm not paid to give Louisville necessarily their props, but I'll give them their props for doing that. Yeah.
Currently, we're not a super active chapter for sure. We at least meet once a year, sometimes twice. Was it 2 years ago? We tried to meet down at the Florence Yalls for a game. A few people showed up. In the past, what really depends is on you guys. Are you doing research that you want to present to us? Are you writing a book, or are you doing something that you want to share to us? Anytime anybody's doing anything, if you want to talk to me about presenting it, I'm always there. If we had more content, I would meet more often. But honestly, even meeting once a year, it's not always easy to fill even a couple hours sometimes. Yeah. The chapter's been around. I was telling somebody last night, we used to have ball players come in. Well, the ones that are retired that live in the area, we've had them in so many times over the years. They're kind of worn out. The newer players, they don't necessarily live in the area, and when they're playing during the season, they get a day off or whatever. They really don't want to. I don't blame them. I'd rather be with my kids and my wife than talking to a bunch of strangers. So that's hard. But we have had a lot of artists come in, sports artists. We've had a couple guys, can't think of his last name, Cam
Miller.
Yeah, he worked on a couple short films.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd love to mix it up when we can.
So I don't want to deviate because we all want to do our presentation here, but I will tell you, it's just on top of my mind. It's kind of a coincidental thing. So I went to my first SABR convention this past year. It was in Minneapolis, and they did a screening of a film by a director named Mark Evans on the life of Dick Perez. I don't know if you guys, hopefully you know who Dick Perez is, but like maybe he's more my time, but he's a lot older than me. He's in his 80s, I think. He was a premier baseball artist. He did all of the Diamond King baseball cards for Don Russ and for Topps, and has done a lot of the Phillies art and has been in the Hall of Fame with his art for years. So he's got a lifetime of baseball art. And this documentarian was showing his kid like some baseball cards, including some old Diamond King cards. And that's what got the documentarian interested enough to contact Dick and say, hey, I wanted to try to do a documentary on the history of baseball, but through the lens of your art. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because they screened that at the convention, and the film is actually coming out for rental and purchase. And again, I'm not paid to advertise for this either, but it's coming out at the end of April. And the documentarian actually contacted me because after the screening, I asked him if I could do an interview with him and Dick Perez about how the film came together. And he allowed me to do that virtually. And so he reached out to me recently and he's like, hey, if you want to get the word out about the film coming out, he's willing to go to some chapters virtually. I don't think he lives out in like Seattle, so I don't think he's coming to he couldn't be out here. But if you have any interest in having him, he's more than willing to come and do a chapter call and talk about, maybe even he could get Dick Perez to come with him. But he did for my virtual interview, which was amazing. Meet this man.
If you could share his contact.
Yeah,
with me,
I totally
just give you my contact would be great. By the way, if you don't know me, I'm Rich Gibson. Sorry, I should have said that first off. My email is crosley_field@msn.com. Yeah, any ideas for presentations, anything. If you just want to shoot me a question or whatever, I'm always around to help. Did you just let me in?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. It just popped in. So we'll go ahead and get started. I guess we're just going the sequence, and I didn't necessarily mean that to be the sequence of somebody, but you're already set to go.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead. So to start off, we've got Daniel and Jen.
You can do, yeah.
Linnenberg,
Yeah.
and they're here to talk about John Reilly, and it's his baseball career and some about his art.
And as an artist.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning. What we want to talk about is John Reilly, who played for Cincinnati first base, played in 1880, and then was out for a couple of years because of the issues with the Cincinnati team, and then basically came back in 1883 and finished up his career in 1891. Next slide, please. How do we get to this quest? As you see here on the screen is a etching by the local Cincinnati artist, Edward Hurley. And we found this etching at the Cincinnati Art Galleries, where they had a whole slew of Hurley's paintings. Hurley was best known as a Rookwood artist here in Cincinnati, but he also did scenes of Cincinnati. And this particular etching is of his good friend, John Reilly, who he was out on a sketching excursion with. Next slide, please.
Okay, so John Reilly's 10-year major league career, it was always Cincinnati, was fairly impressive. He had a .289 lifetime batting average, with 5 of those years where it was 300 or higher, and 2-time home run leader. But what he was best known for was his 2 accomplishments. He was first and still one of the only 4 players to hit for the cycle 3 times in his career. And second, he was his ability to hit triples was fantastic. He hit a career total of 139 triples in a 10-year career, with 1890 being his best individual year with a total of 26, leading the National League.
Next slide.
So at the age of 14, John Reilly started playing organized baseball. This was also the same time that his mother contracted with Strobridge Lithography Company for John to become an apprentice lithographer. Reilly went on to play amateur and semi-pro baseball with local teams, such as the Crescents of McMicken Avenue, the Emmett Greens, and the Mohawk Browns, before becoming a professional major league player. During this time, he also continued his career as a professional lithographer, having his two passions intersect. Early on, the intersection of baseball and art was apparent in Reilly's work as an artist, with his first sketchbook under the auspices of Strobridge. Reilly, as an apprentice lithographic artist, was allowed to work on projects that were useful or important to him.
Next slide.
For instance, his sketchbook reflected his relationship with his older brother Charles, in that it included examples of drafts and final products of advertisements for Charles' engraving business in Louisville, Kentucky. The top picture here is a draft of the working process done on onion paper, and the bottom is the finished product.
Next slide.
His sketchbook also contained advertisement cards for baseball teams, such as the Emmett Greens, with whom he played.
Where did the Emmett Greens play?
Someplace here in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Oh, they were Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't find where.
They were one of the
That's
amateurs.
why I was curious.
Yeah. And for the Cincinnati Resolute Baseball Club in 1877, with his apprenticeship completed, Reilly joined the Strobridge Company as a black ink artist, initially specializing in letter work, meaning that he was drawing the advertising copy, the words, mainly on circus posters. You know, the Ringley Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, old posters that you see. Yeah, he worked on those. As Reilly's artistic career was moving ahead, his baseball prowess was likewise developing. In 1878, Reilly was playing baseball with one of the premier amateur semi-professional teams, the Mohawk Browns. Here he was covering left and center field. The following year, he was playing with the semi-professional team, the Cincinnati Stars, on Sunday afternoon games.
Next slide. Reilly's entrance into professional baseball was enhanced by his participation in the Cincinnati Buffalo baseball exhibition trip to the West Coast in the fall of 1879. There are two stories about how he was convinced it was a good idea to be a part of this team. In January 1909, a story was published about former Cincinnati artist Frank G. Garrison, who relayed how he and Reilly were out on a sketching excursion, and Reilly mentioned to Garrison that he had been offered a substitute position for the trip. Garrison, that's how you pronounce it, had played some ball as an outfielder with both the Crescents, the Emmett Greens, and the Mohawk Browns. And he was urged to take the trip because he knew Reilly would make his mark as a great baseball player. Another news story that came out in May of 1921, Reilly reminisced about joining the 1879 exhibition team. His decision was clinched by the fact that it was, quote, a great opportunity to see the country and do some sketching in the West. This was underscored by the fact that he held on to these cherished sketches for some 42 years. There's also another explanation why he went to California to begin with and not return until December 29th, 1879. His grandfather, John Good, and his family lived in the San Francisco area and Santa Rosa. So it is assumed that Reilly spent some time visiting his family. Next slide, please. The other incident that sort of brought Reilly's fame as an artist came out in 1882 when a story came out about how Reilly had been aboard the SS Narragansett when it was struck by the SS Stonington in the bay about 18 months before the story came out. Most know the story from the newspapers at the time of the tragic accident that occurred in June of 1880. Reilly was traveling from New York to Providence to meet up with the team. After the accident, he assisted passengers by passing out life jackets, helping people into lifeboats. In these later news stories, he was identified for the first time as an artist. Later, a story relays how he lost his portfolio in the accident and was eventually returned to him, and an exchange between him and the finder, who had expressed her appreciation of his artistic talents. When the young woman, Miss Lamb, had found the sketchbook, she had the desire to keep it, but she found a business card for John's brother Charles in the portfolio. So she sent it to John's brother in Louisville, and then John's brother Charles brought the portfolio and the letter that she had written back up to Cincinnati and gave it to her. Reilly was so touched by her kind words of her appreciation of his artistic talents that Reilly went out, since the portfolio was heavily damaged, he found another painting that he had done, and he sent it to her, thanking her for the nice note. The interesting thing was that she wrote back again, expressing her gratitude and her shock, because it just happened that the sketch that Reilly had sent her was of her alma mater in Massachusetts. There was a sense that a romance was going to start, but unfortunately, he wrote back to her, another letter came from her, but that got put in a friend's winter coat pocket at the beginning of the spring, and Reilly did not get that next letter until 6 months later. He did later say when he was heading off to New York in 1882 to play with the Mets, that he was going to try looking her up because she was from that particular area. Next slide, please. The last story about Reilly, who was courted to play for New York, here's a picture of him with the Mets team in 1882, was that due to circumstances, Cincinnati had lost their team, their major league team, in 1881 and 1881. They got it back in 1882, but by that time, Reilly had already signed with the Mets. The reason he signed, he had asked his boss, Matt Morgan, who at Strobridge, whether it'd be a good idea for him to go to New York. Since Strobridge had an office in New York, Matt Morgan recommended it highly because it would give Reilly more experience as a designer as compared to just being a black ink artist. So after he agreed to go to New York, he ended up working for Strobridge in the morning and then playing with the Metropolitans in the afternoon. For the 1883 season, he wanted to stay in New York, but there was a battle for him, and Cincinnati was awarded him, and he went with Cincinnati instead of giving up playing because they offered him some things, some incentives to come to Cincinnati. But he basically said later on that everything he was promised didn't come through. So he referred to Cincinnati was that he was back in Cincinnati for the 1883 season because of quote unquote trickery. As he stated, promises that were made me afterward were ignored, and I was forced to play ball here or not at all. He continued, by coming here, I lost a great opportunity for advancement in my trade. Next slide, please.
So Reilly's reputation as an artist outside of his own sketching and his role as an employee with Strobridge focused more on the humorous side with his cartoons and caricatures. It started with a report of a cartoon in April of 1883 that was hanging on the wall of the baseball club's office. The cartoon, entitled "Don't Sign Till You See Me," shows the picture of a manager talking to a player. Reilly was identified as the artist. However, the cartoon was not published in the paper until after the famed Fulmer in Cramps caricature was published. Next slide. This particular drawing shows Charles John Chick Fulmer, 1851 to 1940, the Cincinnati shortstop. It was reported that the July 21st, 1883 game in Columbus was delayed 25 minutes because Chick Fulmer was sick. The game was able to start when Hick Carpenter arrived from Cincinnati, having taken a later train to Columbus. What was discovered later was that it was a scam on Fulmer's part. Since Carpenter was not present when the game was scheduled to begin, Cincinnati was going to have to forfeit that game. Rules allowed a delay for sick players, so Fulmer pretended to have cramps, acting as if he had cholera. They tried treating him with brandy and even ginger. After Carpenter arrived in uniform, the whole team, including Fulmer, took the field. Cincinnati lost 6-1.
Next slide, please.
In 1883, caricatures and cartoons became a semi-regular thing after the Fulmer and Cramps was published. These are examples of Reilly's cartoons and caricatures that appeared in the Commercial Gazette in 1883.
Next slide, please. Here we're showing the 1883 Cincinnati Baseball Club scorecard. We do know that there was also published with the scorecard was a 7-foot by 10-foot poster of the team, but we don't know if Reilly was the artist on this or that. We do know that one of Reilly's cartoons was to be on the scorecard face on August 7th, 1883. And that Reilly also designed the scorecard for August 11th and 12th. And as the scorecard would start listing the 1894 team as of September 29th, of which this is a copy. Thus, we have no means to definitively state that any or some of this card is the work of John Reilly. There is some belief that that cartoon on the left side might be a Reilly, but we do not have any definitive answer on that whatsoever. The next scorecard, thank you, that we want to talk about is the 1884. Besides the scorecard, there was a 16-sheet advertisement of the team of Reilly's design. Now, a 16-sheet lithograph is basically about, each sheet is 24 by, I believe, 48 inches. So if you have a 16 sheet, you have all these sections that they paste together. We know that he did that, but we don't know if he had anything to do with the scorecard other than all the team members were generally had their face on it, and this is the one that Reilly, his face is on it. But there is no other indication that he had anything to do with it. Next slide. The caricatures continued in 1884 as a semi-regular attraction in the local newspaper. These are some examples of cartoons and caricatures that appeared in the Commercial Gazette in 1884. In 1885, the caricatures and cartoons stopped being published on a regular basis. Next slide. From 1886 until 1888, stories about Reilly as an artist were limited to occasional statements that Reilly was working the off-season at Strobridge. The thing that brought out Reilly's caricature talents again was his and the entire Cincinnati team's interaction with umpire Herm Doscher, who started in early June 1888, when Dozier fined 4 players a total of $55. 3 of those players were for Cincinnati, for not obeying the umpire, and stated that if he had heard what Reilly had said in response, Dozier would have fined him $100. Articles appear throughout the summer commenting on Dozier's bad and rank umpiring. In early September, a story came out that manager Schmeltz believed that Cincinnati had lost at least 12 games because of Dozier, and that he was particularly unfair with McPhee, Reilly, and Nickel. John got his revenge with this cartoon of Dozier's calls in September of 1888. Next slide, please. Okay, now we are dealing with the 1890 Cincinnati Baseball Club scorecard. In November of 1889, now this is the 90 scorecard. In the November of 1889, John Reilly opened a part-time lithographic design company with an unknown individual, primarily because the Throwbridge plant had burned down previously. Due to a change for the 1890 season on how gate receipts were split with the visiting club in the National League, the Cincinnati club decided that they were going to have, quote, the Reds build next season like a circus, end of quote. Reilly was the one handling the design of all the advertising posters of the players, including a life-size 3-sheet poster of Hugh Nickel, who stood 5'6", which would include Nickel's 5'4", 145-pound frame. These posters were to be plastered in all the National League cities prior to the series in each city. At least one additional item was of Reilly did for the Reds, but was not identified in the local press. The item was this 1890 Cincinnati baseball scorecard. Starting in the 1880s, it was not unusual for the design artist of a piece of lithographic art to sign his work as one did with any piece of art. Next slide, please. As you look here, you're seeing the center panel of the scorecard. And if you notice in the lower right-hand corner, there is a signature which is blown up right below it, which has Reilly's artistic signature. I've also put up a couple other examples there so that you can see the closeness in the match. So this is indication that Reilly designed and probably was not only the black ink artist, the designer, the color artist, he probably did everything for this. So this is one of his more famous pieces of work. Next slide, please. This is the other one. This is the 1895 Cincinnati Baseball Club scorecard. Though this was not signed by Reilly, this product has significant provenance. In December of 1894, the Enquirer reported that the manager wanted a new and different scorecard, and he approached Reilly about doing it. In January of 1895, the papers reported that Reilly was designing an original cut for the outside of the front cover. And then in April of 1895, the sports writer Ren Mumford described the card with an illumined baseball sketch by Long John Reilly with portraits of the club's officers and the picture of the grandstand. And, next slide, a page group of the 5 baseball scribes of Cincinnati, which included Mumford. Next slide, please. The interesting little secret about the picture that that center panel picture that Reilly did of the baseball stadium had what we would generally refer to as one of Reilly's passive aggressive behaviors. And that if you notice in this sketch, and this passive aggressive may be a grudge because he was unceremoniously released in 1891, or because they backed out on all the things they promised when he came back in 1883. So there might be a grudge. And the reason we say that is if you look at this very closely, you will notice that there's no first baseman. So the size of it on the card, you probably wouldn't notice it. You only notice it when you blow it up. Next slide, please.
So Reilly had played his final game in 1891 and announced his retirement from baseball in July of 1892. He had already turned his focus to his fine art work besides his continuing employment with Strobridge. He had already joined the ranks as an active professional member of the Cincinnati Art Club in January of 1892. The club forming in October of 1890 with 14 original members, including a dog. They were superstitious about having only 13 members, so they included the dog. The club, which included sketching classes and social events, became the focal point of local artists promoting and selling their art to the public through art shows, exhibits, and tambolas, which are raffles.
Next slide.
And here are members of the original Cincinnati Art Club. See if you can tell which one is Long John.
Yeah. I'm actually looking for the dog.
That's what I was.
It's the guy on the left,
Yeah,
all the way on
that
the
one.
left. That's the really tall guy. Now, Reilly was active in that he participated not only in the social aspects of the art club, such as being a member of the club's band. It should be noted that it was reported he had a very fine singing voice. He played the guitar, the banjo, and there were some hints that he even played the tuba. On numerous occasions, he was a member of the club's hanging committee. Now, this doesn't mean hanging. They're talking about hanging for exhibitions. What portraits, what paintings are they going to hang? Besides being a judge for some of the shows. He was also elected as a club board member in 1917.
Next slide.
The art club would sponsor events and the members would take turns doing artistic endeavors to advertise the events. One year they had a competition. This was Reilly's contribution, for which he won the first prize of $10. And it became the front cover of the 1897 Bazaar brochure. So now we want to address Reilly's life as a landscape artist and a member of the Cincinnati art community in general.
Next slide, please.
Aside from his lithography, Reilly was mainly a landscape artist who did mostly pictures known as thumb box pictures. Small pictures which were generally less than 12 by 8 inches and could fit into a paint box that could also hold the paper, pencils, crayons, watercolors, whatever's needed to paint or draw. The boxes had a single ring in the corner attached by which the artist could hold onto the box with their thumb while they painted the picture. The first review of Reilly's fine artwork was provided in March of 1884 when a small note in the local newspaper reported about his, quote, very fine watercolor drawing of the criminal courts building in New Orleans. It will be on exhibition this week in Will White's drugstore window.
Next slide, please.
It should be noted that on numerous occasions, positive reviews were given about Reilly's work as an artist. Though as you listen to the comments about his artwork, they sound incongruent to his athletic abilities and his physical presence. As one art critic put it, quote, "A strange feature is that this big, strong man makes such small and exquisitely delicate things," end quote. This review was part of Reilly's show of 129 paintings and sketches in 1914.
Next slide, please. Another review of Reilly's work stated, quote, "John G. Reilly's little landscapes are always a revelation. One has the feeling of large pictures done on a small scale rather than small pictures. Many of Long John's little sketches will be found on the walls of studies about town, and no better compliment could be given," end of quote. On one particular picture called Road to the Dairy, it was mentioned as being, quote, "among the most important works of the entire show," end of quote. Next slide, please. It was in July of 1885 that another story of Reilly's abilities as a fine artist appeared in the Chicago Tribune. The author was talking about how she and her partner were on the road headed to Cincinnati, when they came upon a sketching artist doing a ivy-covered cottage. They asked to see what the artist was drawing, and the woman described it as, quote, "a perfect picture of the scene," end of quote. It wasn't until they were attending the Cincinnati versus Athletics game, did they recognize the player as the artist that they had come across earlier. They asked the local who the player was, and the response was, quote, "That's Long John Reilly, their boss first baseman," end of quote. Next slide, please. In the art club show of 1919, the Commercial Tribune art critic stated, quote, "John G. Reilly's four small pictures, which are attractive in subject and in expression, are stamped with the quaint individuality of the artist," end of quote. While the critic from the Enquirer stated that Reilly's painting titled Olive Branch, quote, was "contained true poetic charm," end of quote. Next slide, please. Another quote was that Reilly's work was described as, quote, "distinctive charm," end of quote. Next slide, please. Another quote was, quote, "whose representations for the great out of doors are huge expanses of landscape and sky, simply expressed, but well conveyed," end of quote. Next slide, please. Another quote was, "among the number of quite brilliant sketches I mentioned, John G. Reilly's backyards was mentioned as being one of the best in the show." Another quote was, "and John Reilly's saunterings are good black and whites," end of quote. Next slide, please. Another quote, "John Reilly, whose small landscapes always speak the language of good art," end of quote. Another was, quote, "last night a series of pencil sketches by John Reilly attracted much attention. They were skillfully done, showing the gentleman and adept in the use of that medium." Next slide, please. Another quote, "John G. Reilly can show us scenery which we would believe utterly devoid of any picturesqueness in an attractive aspect, and this he has proved once more in his little sketch at Columbia." Next slide, please. And then another quote was, "John G. Reilly's old house deserve special mention, end of quote. Next slide, please. Now we're getting into his paintings as compared to his sketches. A quote for his work in colors, his tenderly accented watercolors, and also of John Reilly's 3 small pictures, an opaque watercolor at Queen City Beach was not only the best, but really as charming at the same as we might say jolly, a combination as we have seen, end of quote. Next slide, please. Here's another quote. The watercolors of John Reilly are delicate and sweet. Next slide, please. Another quote. John G. Reilly is, as usual, irresistible in his tenderly accented watercolors. End of quote. Next slide, please. In the annual fall display of the art club, one critic wrote, quote, among the more striking things by other artists were studies in watercolor, including small watercolors by John Reilly. At the same show, an art critic wrote, Long John Reilly, who is well represented by a number of charming sketches and studies in watercolor and pencil, apparently he is as successful in art as he was on the diamond. Next slide, please. In the last paragraph of the obituary of famed Cincinnati artist Frank Duveneck, it stated, quote, not only was Mr. Duveneck regarded as a wonderful artist, but his judgment of pictures was unsurpassed, and his estimate of the work of young painters was looked upon as infallible. It should be noted, end of quote, it should be noted that Mr. Duveneck owned 2 paintings by Long John Reilly, and Reilly said of that, quote, I can honestly say that I consider that the highest compliment that has ever been paid to my work, end of quote. Next slide.
One of the main ways that the art club raised money was with their annual Tombola raffle. Each member would donate a painting or 2 to the club. Each club member would sell tickets to family and friends, but generally they only sold a finite number of tickets based on the number of paintings donated plus 1. Thus, each ticket holder would win a painting by a club member. The plus 1 would get the grand prize, which was referred to as the Tombola. In many cases, it was a painting by which a number of members would paint on a single canvas like this. Only 2 of these paintings are known to still exist. One hangs in the Cincinnati Art Museum, and the other is this one from 1894, where Reilly was one of the artists, which is now part of a private collection. And his part of the painting is
up to the right. Go to the right. Yeah,
right there.
That's the one he did. It should be noted that some of the other artists, Albert Valentine, Henry Farney, John and Martin Reddick, are sort of all grouped around them, and those are the main people that he hung around with at the Cincinnati Art Club. They were other members of the band. Okay, next slide, please.
So we continue our search for examples of the artistic work of Long John Reilly. This example here is still being evaluated to determine if it can emphatically be identified as an original John G. Reilly painting. We bought it thinking, okay, maybe it is him, maybe not, but Dan knows so much about Reilly now, he's almost the expert on
his art.
His art. Okay, so Reilly always saw himself first and foremost.
Oh, next slide, please.
As an artist. In the 60+ Cincinnati city directories for his lifetime, Reilly listed himself as an artist, engraver, lithographer, and or designer 59 times, as compared to the 4 times he was listed as a ball player. His major decisions always leaned towards how that particular choice would assist him in his trade as an artist. This particular drawing of Reilly lists that he had been at Strobridge for 53 years. This was done 7 years before his retirement in 1932.
Next slide, please.
The conclusion we came to, and thus followed the most, was that John Long John Reilly perceived and dedicated himself first and foremost to his art and secondarily to baseball. Though in everything he did so with dedication and passion. And here are some of the additional examples of Reilly's.
Just run through the last couple of
Yes,
slides. Are there any questions?
Yeah, it looks like you, a lot of these are listed with this.
Yeah.
How many pieces do you own?
32.
Oh, my.
How did you acquire most of them?
Basically, the Cincinnati Art Galleries, where we got the original Hurley of John Reilly, had one of the sketchbooks. Has anybody read the John Thorne article about John Reilly and his art? John Thorne bought 3 of them. A couple other people bought 1 or 2 there. We bought 27 of them, of the sketches, but they're all from the same particular source. The other ones, some were through the Cincinnati Art Galleries. The one that's up there right now is the first one I missed. I was a month late on the auction for that one, so that's.
So these weren't all acquired in one auction?
No, oh, no. This is the last, I was here about 3-4 years ago or something like that, and asking if anybody had any leads on John Reilly art. Nobody
I
did.
remember that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, well, a lot of these, since that moment, I think at that moment, we had about 4. We ended up getting 32 of them. Cincinnati Art Galleries was kind of tired of selling them slowly, so they let me have the last 21 all at once.
Made a deal with them.
How did you get started?
I was gonna say, why Reilly?
Yeah.
Because of that picture by Hurley.
That
We-
set you on I want
that-
Reilly, like, that's kind of.
That set us on that particular one. We're
That set us on research.
research.
Who was
Oh,
Reilly?
I'm curious what drew you to Reilly's art versus a different artist or is he a part of a
Well,
collection of artists that you guys like, or why Reilly?
Well, because of that picture by Hurley, we thought, oh, this is an interesting thing. And we thought he was keeping score.
Originally in that picture.
Because it looks like he's the guy
Oh.
sitting there keeping score. And then we found out he was actually sketching because he was an artist. Oh, well, what about him? We should know more about him. We've traveled to places where he's lived. I mean, literally, our house is floor to ceiling with paintings.
By
Lisa-
John Reilly
By John-
and his
His
associates.
associates.
The people, I've got pictures by the band, what I refer to as the band, which was Farney, Henry Sharp, Edward Pothaste, Arthur Valentine, and John Reddick. They all played the musical instruments, so I've got those. Then I found articles about the sketching exercises or excursions he did. So I got paintings by the people he went out with who knew him. So that's how come the whole house is covered with
It's
this.
an obsession with him.
But
It's a horrible obsession.
we're big minor league baseball fans. We've been to 205 different minor league parks over the years. And so we're just sort of everything baseball. And when this came up,
Okay, so then I'm curious. So is then the draw to, or what got you into the draw to Reilly actually that he's not just he's an artist, but the connect, like if he had not had that connection to baseball, would you have been obsessed with a different artist? Or is it that connection to baseball that makes it so much more interesting for you?
I grew up in a family of people who appreciate art.
Mhm.
And so in that sense, we sort of the family sort of concentrates on Cincinnati artists.
Okay, so that's another part of it.
Yeah,
Cincinnati.
that's another part of it. But that connection with the baseball.
Yeah.
And the scorecards, the 1890 scorecard and the scorecard which he did in 1895 and then the 1890 were not known at the time by the Hall of Fame who had them, that they were done by Reilly. We got the Hall of Fame to change the descriptions to mention Reilly.
He knows more about, I'm sure he's the foremost
No, there's a
specialist on John Reilly, except there is one guy,
Thomas Reilly.
Canadian.
I'm not sure. The book was sold out in Canada.
Yeah,
That wrote sort of talked about Riley's major league career primarily.
yeah, all he did was talk about each game. Game.
Hey, if I'm John Reilly, I'm looking down on you going, I'm so glad I got a big fan and advocate. Like,
I didn't make any money when I was alive, but you know, it's.
Are you aware of any other baseball players that were that successful while they played as an artist?
As an artist,
Because I mean, I know like Bill Bray's more current.
Yeah.
He's a great painter. It seems like a lot of people like Eddie Johnson's photography.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wade Hoyt.
Wade Hoyt, but he really started that later on.
Yeah, that wasn't why he was
Yeah,
playing.
and he got lessons by
What was
Robert
his
Fay.
Fame? Did you ever see the painting they had at the Reds Hall of Fame that was Wade Hoyt's?
No,
I don't know how I think they acquired it from Cincinnati Art Gallery. Anyway, if you look, I forget who the portrait was, but it looks a little odd. And, I'll try to make a longer story shorter. My ex-wife was a director of nursing where Mr. Fay lived at the end of his life, continued to work till he passed, did art shows there and everything. And so she got to spend some time with him and he told her a lot about teaching Wade Hoyt how to paint. And I guess one of his complaints was Wade was really bad at creating the heads, the right perspective to the
Oh,
bodies.
Yeah.
And I believe that painting in the Hall of Fame, Mr. Fabe actually went in and redid the heads. I'm so upset about it.
well, I used to tell people, and true story, that I was Wade Hoyt's drug dealer. Not really. I worked for a pharmacy in Cincinnati, and Wade Hoyt was one of the customers, and so he was always good for a quarter. This was years ago.
Did you come across it, or are you aware of any other artists that were that successful? Why they played?
Not that I know of, not off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
I've never,
I mean,
I can't think of anybody I've ever read or heard
you
about.
know, I tend to concentrate on Cincinnati.
Sure.
since, you know, growing up here.
I didn't know if like along the path you might have come across somebody.
No, I mean, I know there's some, but not really who basically focused so much on art as John Reilly did. I mean, he was,
Seemed like he was good at everything he touched.
Yeah.
oh yeah, he was.
He was a great ball player, and think about it, he outdid Babe Ruth in
triples.
triples
He had
and-
139 triples in a 10-year career.
in a 10-year career. but
Babe Ruth
did it over
Had 136 in a 20
20.
plus year career.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Should we take a couple minute break?
Oh, thank you very
Oh,
much.
pleasure. Thank you.
Another tell us about your minor league trips.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, we got
I've been
presentations
to
on
maybe
that.
30 or so, but I
Yeah,
love it.
maybe
Yeah.
30. Pretty good. I've been
Yeah,
maybe
well,
30.
Yeah, yeah, we're more than happy to on that one. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank
Guys
you.
played off each other.
Yeah,
So I'm Russ Speiller. I've joined SABR in 2023, so reasonably recently. And I didn't really know what I wanted to get out of it at the time. Actually, Gary, who I had met, the artist behind this piece, told me about SABR, and I said I'd give it a try. And since then, I've written, researched and written stories for multiple SABR books. It's been an absolute blast over the last 2 years. I was here last year actually for the first time because I had done some research on Sandy Koufax when he was a UC Bearcat. And no one had looked into his year as a Bearcat before he got drafted by the Brooklyn Dodgers. I thought it was hilarious to be here specifically because Koufax, as a Bearcat, only lost one game, and it was to Xavier. So I was like, I just thought it was fun to kind of present that story and be like, he had one loss right here, right at Xavier.
I think you're the one that told us that no one knows what number he.
Yes, no one knows what his jersey number was. He does not remember his jersey number. There are no existing photographs with his jersey number. The Inquirer was never able to figure out what his jersey number. So there was this huge mystery. And UC even said if anybody could figure out his jersey number, they would be grateful because they just can't figure it out. I think one of the more fun things I learned in researching the Sandy Koufax story is that he had the second leading batting average for the Bearcats. He had like a .419 batting average, but his major league average was like minuscule. It was like, I think it was under 100. I mean, it was terrible. He was a terrible major league ball player, but in batting wise, obviously as a pitcher, he was amazing. So that was really cool. I got to go down to the UC archives and get his student file. That was pretty neat to touch his student file. But anyways, I'm here today to talk about another Cincinnati pitcher who is much less known than Sandy Koufax. And his name is Porter Ankleball Moss. That was his nickname, and I'll share with you why in a minute. As I said, this is, for those of you who went to the bathroom or weren't here, this was an original illustration by Gary Sierdzkowski. He lives in Northern Kentucky. He's a fantastic baseball artist. I really admire his work, and I was fortunate to collaborate with him on the story of Porter Moss, where we did the research, and he did this incredible illustration and even Easter egged my name into it. I'm Russ, and it just says USS back there, but it's Russ uses buoy, and this apparently was Lifebuoy, which was a soap back in the day. Yeah, for BO. So it says I use Lifebuoy for my BO. So I'm like, all right, thanks for that. Immortalized with my BO. I'm like, all right. I was told him I thought it was funny because Lifebuoy is a Unilever brand and I work for Procter & Gamble, but hey, you couldn't find an Ivory ad anywhere. And he's like, this was Crosley Field. So that background is Porter, who pitched for the Tigers at Crosley. And so he was trying to be as authentic as possible to what was advertised at Crosley, which was Lifebuoy, not Ivory. All right, next slide. So with an assist from actually the Louisville SABR chapter president, Chris Betch, who had the access to Ancestry.com at his library, he went in there and got the census records for me. So I want to make sure to give him credit for that. Porter Moss was born on June 10th, 1910. His father, Lee Moss, had a number of kids. And interestingly enough, in the census, I didn't see the name of the mom, but on the World War II draft card, it listed Porter's mom as Ida Calloway. And so there's a little bit of like, maybe that was not his biological mom, but somebody who was his caretaker, because you don't see much of Lee Moss after this particular census. So you don't hear a lot about his dad, Lee. You hear about Ida. So it's possible that he was in the custody. He and his siblings were primarily raised by Ida. Raised here in Cincinnati, because if you look at the census, Lee had kids in a number of different states. I think South Carolina might be the one that Porter was born in, but he was raised here in Cincinnati. He was pretty much a Cincinnatian. So if you go to the next slide, he did not go to Xavier, but it's okay.
That it?
Yeah, next one.
Next one, hang on.
All right. He did go to, he grew up in the West End, and this was a product of what we've heard as the Great Migration. So this was in the 19-teens, 1920s. You've got African Americans coming up for jobs from the South to the North, including Cincinnati. And so Porter's family came here. He was raised here in the West End, and he went to the Harriet Beecher Stowe School. You can see a picture of it's an old postcard. I believe it was from like 1910, 11, somewhere around there. The school itself was established in 1914. And while, this isn't the Porter necessarily connected to Porter Moss's story, I thought it was interesting to even look into the Harriet Beecher Stowe School, because it's not something I had heard about, but I'm not originally from Cincinnati. For those of you who don't know, I think it's worth mentioning that the school was founded in 1914 by educator Jenny Davis Porter. And she founded this school to provide equitable education and employment opportunities for African Americans. But this was not designated as like a colored school, like in other places where they had, this is designated colored school. This was never officially designated as a colored school, but it definitely served as a beacon for all of the African-American families that were moving up in the Great Migration, this was the place, you know, when they landed here, this was the school that this woman devoted herself to educating the African-Americans the families who did come here. And in fact, it's their enrollment swelled. In its first 8 years, the student population more than tripled. So in 1914, there was 350 students at this school. But by 1922, when Porter would have been 12 years old and attending the school, there were 1,300 students. And Porter was so dedicated to educating these students that she made sure to bring in a lot of the prominent African Americans at the time. So like Langston Hughes came to the school to speak to the students, to show them, hey, you know, these are the folks that we should be holding up as our role models. George Carver also showed up, Paul Robeson and Marion Anderson as well. And again, it was to give the children positive role models to emulate. One of the prominent citizens who I'll come back to who attended the Harriet Beecher Stowe School besides Porter Moss was DeHart Hubbard. I don't know if any of you have heard of DeHart Hubbard, but I'll tell you the big fact about DeHart is that he was the first African-American to win an Olympic gold medal. So here in Cincinnati, we produced the first African-American to win an Olympic gold medal. I believe it was in a track and field event. He's also the person who ended up founding the Cincinnati Tigers. And that connection will come to Porter in a second. And that's actually the uniform that I'm wearing. This is the Cincinnati Tigers uniform. Okay, from 1936 or 37. There are a number of articles I found that mentioned through Porter's teammates or people who knew Porter, but not by Porter himself, that he was also college educated. So in addition to going through high school at Harriet Beecher Stowe School, he was said to have gone to West Virginia State College. If you've never heard of West Virginia State College, I'm pretty sure you've heard of West Virginia University. That is the West Virginia State College. It became West Virginia University. I did call the library there to see if, in fact, he was a student in what would have been, I'm guessing, the late 20s. And they said, we have no records of anyone from back then. We did not keep records. We have no yearbooks. The librarian was like, I really apologize, but we just have a big gap at the time that he would have been there. So I can't confirm that he was there. I can only tell you that it was mentioned numerous times that he was college educated there. It was mentioned by others besides himself. Where he got his baseball career started, if you will, was across from the Harriet Beecher Stowe School. There was a Sinton Park. So that's a postcard of Sinton Park from, I think that one was from 1910. So, or 1911 when he was a year old. Yeah, that one I think is from 1911. So you could see it was known as a colored playground across from the school. And they had a Sinton Twilight softball league that played there regularly. And that's where Porter developed his craft, in which what he became known for, and the source of his nickname Ankleball, is because he was a submariner. And the ball always looked like it was being delivered from his ankles. And that carried him through what I will talk to you about as just an exceptional career that, unfortunately, I think most of us don't know about or celebrate, because he was killed at the age of 34, okay, when he was in his prime. And we'll get there in a second as well. So you can go to the next slide. So 1933 is when he first shows up in Cincinnati newspapers. He showed up as a member of the Goodyear shoe repair team because he struck out 15 batters twice, and clearly caught the attention of folks who graduated from Harriet Beecher Stowe, like DeHart Hubbard, so that when Hubbard founded the Tigers, he wanted Porter Moss as one of the players on that team. In between there, he did have one game for the Indianapolis ABCs. He pitched okay. I think he pitched like 4 or 5 innings, gave up a few runs. It wasn't super spectacular in that one game, but he had done so well as a member of the shoe repair company and as a part of that Sinton Twilight softball league that DeHart Hubbard said, hey, I'm starting a Cincinnati Tigers team. I want you to be one of the premier pitchers on that team. The Cincinnati Tigers, if you go to the Reds Hall of Fame, there is a big, big picture of the Cincinnati Tigers like on the wall. But they pretty much concentrate on 1937 because that's the year the Tigers were an official member of the Negro American League. But they did exist prior to that. They played for several years from like, I think 1932 or at least 34 to 37. They played in an independent league called the Indiana Ohio League. And Moss was a member of the Tigers both when they were in the independent league as well as 1937 when they were officially a part of the Negro American League. What was absolutely fascinating going back through old newspapers, especially newspapers that were not Cincinnati based. So like one of them is from Brunswick, which is in the Northeast. I think either New Jersey or New York, I forget, but there's some other ones that you'll see from like Georgia and other places, is that Moss armed with that ankle ball delivery was becoming someone who was regularly compared to Satchel Paige. And everybody knows who Satchel Paige is, right? Like, I mean, he's a household name, if you will, in the Negro Leagues. Moss, in some of the papers that I'm showing there, and I know it's too small to read, so I apologize. It was stated by these other out of town newspapers that he was superior to Satchel, that people enjoyed watching him more than Satchel. He was called the Midwestern Satchel Paige. He was called the Negro Dizzy Dean, which I know means nothing to you, but that was I don't know, Paul Skeens, like, all right. So these were some of the more famous, big time pitchers, right? And here you have this Cincinnati and Porter Moss, who was on comparison, at least in the papers. Now, was it hyperbole? As I looked into his complete statistics, I mean, he was not statistically in my mind, comparable to Satchel. Satchel had a very long career, as you guys probably remember. He pitched through his mid 40s. He pitched for the Indians, right? Helped them, I think, in 46, right, when they won the World Series. And Porter just didn't have that lengthy of a career. Again, I'll get to it because he was tragically murdered. I should say killed. But these were some really interesting comparisons. What I found was comparable between Porter and Satchel was the bravado that the two of them had. So Satchel was like this, like, you can't beat me. I'm Satchel Paige. I'm going to make you look silly. Porter was the same way. According to Porter's teammates, he would go to the hotels where the teams they were going to play were at, and he would knock on the door and be like, let me tell you what I'm going to do to you tomorrow. Like, you don't want this. You don't want any of this ankle ball submarine delivery. I'm going to make you look silly. He was a very jovial, according to teammates. He was jocular. He was kind of the life of the team. And he felt like, I got the stuff. Okay. And in fact, as a Tiger, he really did have the stuff. His ERAs were typically in the 3s or lower. He pitched 2 hitters. He pitched a couple of no hitters. And throughout his career, he made it to 3 All-Star games, 3 Negro League All-Star games. They would be called like the East-West All-Star games. So he pitched in 3. He was elected to 3 of those. And in fact, at one point, he had the second highest number of fan votes. Because back then, whether you know it or not, it was also still fan elected. He had the second most number of fan votes of any player elected to one of those 3 All-Star games. So he was a popular dude, right? And he made a name for himself. So you can go to the next slide. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, it's in the top right. I thought this was kind of cool. The Japanese sent an all-star squad to the U.S. In the I think it was either 36 or 37. And they played at Crosley. The Tokyo Giants played at Crosley against Moss's Cincinnati Tigers. And in the first inning, did not look good for Cincinnati. The team committed 3 errors and gave up 5 runs. It was already down 5-0. And so the manager came in and relieved the starting pitcher with Porter Moss, who proceeded to shut down the Giants for the next 8 innings while the Tigers mounted a comeback and won the game 9-5.
Right.
And that was directly accountable to Moss's incredible pitching. I don't think they had seen an ankle ball delivery at that time. Now I can go to the next slide.
Can I ask a question before you?
You absolutely
The
can.
Indiana-Ohio League?
Yes.
Was that an integrated league?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I met a couple people that played in that league, but they were all African Americans.
I'm not aware that it was integrated, but I'd have to look.
I've never heard it called a all black or.
Yeah, it wasn't referenced that way for sure.
Okay.
So,
Not sure. Okay.
but I'm not sure.
Thank you.
This is a picture of the Tigers. You can see Porter Moss there, the first one on the top left. Like I said, I'm sporting that uniform right now, thanks to Ebbets Field flannels. Again, I'm not paid to advertise more, but this is the one and only thing I've bought from them, and I'm pretty actually happy with it. It's a really nice jersey. I'll also tell you that at one point I met George Foster wearing this jersey, and he told me that these were actually old Reds jerseys as well, that the Tigers repurposed. Yeah, the Tigers these were hand-me-downs for the Tigers, but this was actually an old Reds jersey as well.
I have a repro hat from 34.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks it's a Cincinnati Reds hat. Like, oh, when they wore the blue, I forget, was that the 50s where they had the blue But, yeah, I believe they were handed down.
Yep.
That's what I've been told.
So you can go past this one. Another kind of team photo there. You see him a little bit. It looks like his hat's tilted to the side a little bit, but another Tigers photo. All right. Yeah, you can go. Sorry, were you gonna say something?
Play with the Tigers.
Yes. Yes. And actually, thank you for that transition. Because what happened after third, so first of all, in 1937, the Tigers were pretty damn good. I could get you their record. It was, I want to say, like 89 to 90 wins. They, I believe, were no lower than second place that year. They had a really good squad, including, I think, Ted Double Duty Radcliffe. But financially, they were not as strong, and so they ended up having to fold after their 1 year in that Negro American League. And when they folded, Ted Double Duty Radcliffe went on to go to the Memphis Red Sox. I think he went on to manage the Memphis Red Sox, and he took Porter with him, as long as with a few other players. So, hey, the Tigers are disbanding. Let's take some of the better players and merge them onto the Memphis Red Sox. So that's where Moss got started with the Red Sox in 1938. He ended up pitching for the rest of his career through 1944 for the Red Sox. His first 2 years there were not great. I'm talking like ERAs of over 7. Yeah, in 38 and 39, he something went amiss for him. I can't tell you exactly why it went off the rails, but statistically it went off the rails for him. And so probably made the right move in 1940 by taking a step back. He decided to take a year away from the Red Sox. He went to Mexico, where he was outstanding. In the Mexican League, he pitched over 12 innings and didn't give up a single run. And there's also some evidence to suggest he might have also gone to Cuba to play in the Cuban leagues. I could not, nor could Gary, find any actual records from the Cuban League showing him on one of the teams. The reason it comes up is because there was, I guess, some manifests of the boats coming back from Havana. And he was on one of them with some of the ball players who were in the Cuban League. So it's like, why was he on that manifest? We don't know. It could have been to be on as a part of the Cuban League, but we can't find any definitive evidence that he was there. Mexican League, however, we found the definitive evidence, including his record, that he was there. But whatever happened to him out in Mexico and Cuba, whether it was the fresh air, the salty sea, I don't know. But the guy came back a stud. He came back in 1941, re-energized, back to the Memphis Red Sox, and as I mentioned earlier, ends up getting selected to 3 East-West All-Star games. This is a picture of him as a member of the Red Sox. You can go on to the next slide. This is, again, a picture of him with the team on the Red Sox. As a member of the Red Sox, after 1940, so after he rejoined the Red Sox, his ERA was never higher than 3.8. He was always 3s and unders. And as I'll show you or talk to you in a minute, his actually best year was the year he was killed. And in fact, from 1941 through 1944, his ERA just kept getting lower and lower. I'm talking 3.63 in 1941, 3.25 in 1942. And 1943, he was, I think, also in the 3s and made what I'll show you going to the next slide. He made the All-Star team this was technically his last All-Star team that he was physically there for. And I'll tell you what I meant by that in a second. But in 1943, this was likely his biggest public highlight. And by public highlight, I mean 51,000 people there to see him do his thing. They didn't get that level of attendance in most of the Negro League games, but this was the most highly attended of the Negro League All-Star games. 1943, Comiskey Park, over 51,000 people showed up to watch the game. Satchel Paige was a starting pitcher for the West, and Moss. So in the ninth inning, they were winning 2-0. Moss's team, the West team, was winning 2-0. When what's his name? I'll write it down. Satchel started up 2-0. Buck Leonard hit a home run for the East. That made it 2-1. The pitcher proceeded to get 2 outs, but also let 2 men get on base. So now you've got 2 outs, 2 men on base. And rather than let that particular pitcher finish the game, manager Vic Harris, or the manager decided he was going to summon in Porter to try to get that last out. On the east side, the manager was a player manager, Vic Harris. Okay. And Vic decided, I'm pinch hitting. Like, I'm going to be the one to drive in the tying run and possibly the winning run. Right. I'm going to put it all on me. So, and Vic was known as being a clutch hitter. Like, so he's not doing this just because I'm Vic Harris, I'm the manager, I'm just going to put this all on myself. He had a pedigree of being a great clutch hitter. So he came in to face Moss and proceeded to fly out. Moss got him just a routine fly out straight center field. Center fielder barely had to move, and 51,000 people erupted. And if you look at the papers itself, Porter was mobbed. So it was only 1 out in a multi-year career. But in reading, as much reading as I've done about Porter and all the newspapers, like, this was like his moment to shine. And again, I think that's because you got 51,000 people in an all-star game in Comiskey Park. So that has a lot to do with it. All right, now you can go to the next slide. This is just a little bit more about how some of the out-of-town papers would talk about Porter. And I think this might be even the one that I've quoted earlier where they said superior to Satchel Paige. More, people wanted to see him pitch more than they wanted to see Satchel pitch. So again, some hyperbole, but really cool to see all these other papers kind of talking about how great Porter was. So you can go to the next slide. All right, now we come to the heart of some of the research that Gary and I did and the tragedy in Porter's life story. Okay, so July 16th, 1944, the Memphis Red Sox team bus breaks down, all right, on the way back to Memphis. So they're in Tennessee, not yet back to Memphis. The bus breaks down. It's not the first time this happens. I mean, to be honest with you guys, like, these team buses, Negro League team buses, were not exactly like, gorgeous buses that we get today. A lot of them were probably hand-me-down buses, quite frankly. And so breaking down was not unusual. This was not the first time it happened. So it breaks down. They're headed back to Memphis. They're scheduled to play a doubleheader the next day against, I believe it was the Cleveland Buckeyes. And so the team is forced to hop on the train, go to the nearest train station, and hop on the train. So this would have been around McEwen, Tennessee, right? And what we've got there, and Gary did an amazing job of this. That's actually his, I believe, illustrations or whatever. He's got the train map going. So they board on McEwen, which you can see all the way on the right, at 12 a.m. in the morning. Porter Moss and the Red Sox board that team to try to get back to Memphis for the doubleheader against the Buckeyes. This is the Jim Crow South. Okay, so what that means is the African Americans are sequestered in the back of the train near the engine in the, quote, Jim Crow car. All right, they're packed in. It's standing room only. In addition to African Americans being put in that train at this time period, a lot of times if there was a drunk, disorderly person, they were also put in that area of the train. Okay. And in this particular case, when the team boarded the train, there was already a gentleman on the train who had got on earlier. His name is Johnny Easley. Johnny was said by witnesses to have been drinking, right? So you've got this kind of inebriated person. While their train is moving and they're all in the back there, Johnny is harassing some of the women in the car. He's trying to potentially drum up a gambling game with the guys. He was acting kind of dumb. He was acting kind of unruly, kind of stupid. And Porter tried joking with him from what, and I base this on, you'll see in a minute, but there's newspaper accounts that we went looking for of the details of what was going on the train at the time. And so what was reported back in 1944 by at least by the Atlanta Daily World, and it was syndicated by the Memphis Daily World, which were African-American papers at the time, by the way. These are historical African-American papers, was that, Easley was acting silly, stupid, silly. Porter was joking with him. There might have been some moments that got, escalated a little bit, like maybe a fight was going to break out kind of thing. He also was not making any friends with the porter of the train or the rail or the conductor. They were noticing this as well, and they were not taking kindly to the behavior that Johnny had. All right. And so Johnny's
and if I didn't mention, he also had his 3 sisters with him. He and his 3 sisters were scheduled to get off at Camden. As the train is pulling in, according to the paper, Johnny jumps off before the train stops, grabs a pistol in his pocket, wheels around, and fires a shot back into the train car. Okay? That shot hits Porter right below his abdomen. All right? And it perforates his large intestines and his colon. And so now you've got Porter bleeding out. Okay? And so if you go to the next slide, this is the as we were looking through newspaper accounts after the death, this is the only one that gave details. And I know you can't read it. I've pulled out a certain section for a reason, but what you can see, what you would read in the other sections is that these details were given apparently by the Memphis Red Sox publicity man, Sam Brown. So, the paper is reporting on witness accounts and on the publicity accounts. And I also do want to frame, and you'll understand why in a second for good reason, this is an African-American paper that's publishing this as well. Because what you'll also see it in the big letters here. When he's bleeding out, and so what they end up doing is they lay him down on the baggage claim car on a bunch of uniforms. Okay, so he's laid out, he's bleeding out, and he's saying, "I need air, I need a doctor." No, right, as you would of course think. When they get to the stop before Brewston, they're told that there's no hospital at that particular stop. Okay, I'm sorry, there's no one to treat you. There's no ambulance. There's no hospital. So you go on to the next stop, which is Brewston. And as you see in this report from this paper, a doctor came on the train. The doctor is a white doctor, and the doctor had been called to treat another injured man who supposedly had been involved in a fight on another coach on the same train. So this doctor is not necessarily being called for Porter's issues. He's being called for someone for a different reason, but he goes on there. And what I want to point to, because it becomes controversial, which is not what I expected when Gary and I did the research, is it says the doctor gave Moss an injection. A white doctor comes on and he gave Moss an injection and he told the friends, take him to the next station. There's also no hospital ambulance here. So this is now the second time they're hearing, sorry, there's no ambulance, there's no hospital. Okay. One of the things that Gary and I did was we actually called these towns and we spoke to the librarians at the towns, because we asked them we didn't tell them what I did not when I called say, hey, I'm researching a story about an African-American pitcher and all this other stuff. I said, I'm researching a story and I need to know, was there a hospital in Brewston? Was there a hospital there was another one, which was Lexington, Tennessee. I said, was there a hospital here? And I was told, as was Gary, by each town, no. In 1944, you would have had to have gone to Jackson, Tennessee to get to a hospital. Okay. So you've got a doctor who comes on board, supposedly gives Moss an injection and tells him there's no hospital at this station. And in fact, it's true. And there's no hospital at the next one either. So I think before you go to the next slide, I think by the time the train gets to Jackson, he gets an ambulance that he needs. He gets driven to a hospital for an emergency operation. Obviously, by the fact that I told you he was tragically killed at age 34, he didn't make it. Okay, he had bled out. The reason I'm spending quite a bit of time of underscoring those things is go to the next slide. All right. When I first heard about Porter Moss, it was because I had listened to a couple of podcasts, one by Cam Miller, who you mentioned, Rich, who's a local Cincinnati historian, who did a podcast on Porter Moss. And the other podcast I heard was from Bob Kendrick, who's at the Negro League Hall of Fame Museum. Both of them did podcasts on the Porter Moss story. And both of them stated in the podcast that the doctor got on the train and refused to treat Porter Moss because he was black. And I was like, that's interesting. And that's where I started. And actually, that's the story that I thought Gary and I were going to kind of tell. But then when we did the research, we found the newspaper that I just showed you, which was the only one with details. And it says that there's, in an African-American paper, it says a white doctor comes on and gives him an injection and tells him there's no treatment available here, right? So when did that change, right? And so we found the source of when that changed here in the Cincinnati Enquirer in the story John Reilly wrote. And I think John is in a number of books in the Reds Hall of Fame. I've seen his name in a number of books, and they're all great books. But he did a story in '93, and in that story, there's a quote from Moss's teammate who was with him, Verdell Mathis. And he says the following: we were told there was a doctor at the next station. When we got there, he said he wouldn't treat Moss because he was colored. We had to go on to the next station. So now you've got a little bit of a, now this was 50 some odd years later. And honestly, like, I cannot answer for anyone today why the story 50 years later out of Verdell's recollection was the doctor boarded and wouldn't treat him. And yet the story from 1944, like a week after this happens, from an African-American paper is a white doctor boards and gives him an injection. So this gets to kind of speculation at this point because Verdell's not around to ask, hey, because, and again, this is my speculation. It's possible Verdell saw an injection as not much treatment at all. It's very possible these guys are like, look, the man is bleeding out. You're telling me what do you mean there's no hospital? You might be telling me that because we're colored, right? So I don't know that I believe you, right? We've been told this already once, right? And now all you're doing is giving him an injection. Like, there's got to be more you can do. That's just my conjecture of, I'm not living in 1944 Southern times, Tennessee times. I'm not African American, but I'm trying to do my best to like say, well, why might this story have changed, or why might his recollection be different than what the paper reported? And that's at least one possibility, is that he's like, an injection is nothing. And maybe the guy was just like, I'm here to treat this other person. This is what I can do. You're not going to find a hospital here. Keep going. Right. And they looked at that as, that's nothing. Right. Now, having said that, you got a guy who's bleeding out and needs an operation. And I have no idea what a guy with a medical bag in 1944 is really going to be able to do when you're bleeding out and need an operation. For all I know, the injection had morphine in it. And that was like all you could do to kind of like try to keep him calm. But it's interesting now because we're sitting on this information. I'll be honest, I don't know, other than presenting it, how much further I want to take where it goes. It's just a weird climate too, to be like researching this stuff right now. I just think it's interesting and factual to show you that, hey, the podcast, if you look them up and you hear about it, you consistently hear and read, even on Baseball Reference. If you go to look up Porter Moss on Baseball Reference, very well-known website for looking up baseball statistics and things like that, they report the doctor refused to treat him because he was colored. I think this is why. I think this story is what originated that. And I can only tell you that in the 1944 newspaper that I just showed you, that, we looked up in the archives, it tells a little bit different story, in that statement about a white doctor coming out and giving an injection. So I'm going to wrap this up quickly now, because that was kind of the meat of it. So go ahead to the next slide. This is his certificate of death. As I mentioned to you, it was perforations. There was a gunshot wound in his abdomen. In some of the papers, it talks about his intestines and his colon and perforations there. You can keep going. This was his full pitching stats, of which I already read you a number of his ERAs. But as I mentioned, you can kind of see it. He progressively, particularly after that year away, first of all, he's great as a Tiger, then not so great in his beginnings as a Red Sox player. But then when he came back in 1941, he was just doing better and better and better every year. I can tell you that he was posthumously elected to his 4th All-Star game for 1944. He had a 2.45 ERA through the mid-July. He was it was said in the papers that if he hadn't died, the Red Sox likely would have potentially been champions because he was that good that year. He was an ace for them. And it was mid-July when he was tragically shot. And so he just kept getting better and better. So this, in a lot of ways, though 34 isn't necessarily these days known as your prime age in baseball, he was on the rise. Okay. I think that's the last slide. The last thing I'll tell you about him is he is buried here in Cincinnati. I don't know if anybody's like interested in necessarily visiting the grave sites of ball players. I've thought about, I need to go. I mean, I did the story. I'd like to kind of see it. It's a cemetery. I think it's called like United American. I'd have to look it up. But if you go to find a grave, Porter Moss, it's in Madisonville. So it's not far from here at all. that his gravestone lies.
So I'll talk a little bit while Dave's pulling this up. Yeah, so I've been developing a model over the last couple of years. I was a year ago, I published the first version of this in the Baseball Research Journal. And I did go to Minneapolis, and I think we met in Minneapolis, I think, and presented there. I think since expanded it, and now I've also going to getting published into the Baseball Research Journal coming up in a little bit. So this
the next one coming out.
The next one coming up. So I'll talk a little bit about this. I've done baseball stats. I do work on the Reds grounds crew. I do aviation consulting, and I'm a student right now at UC. Disclaimer is this is for me. It's not from the Reds, though I work for the Reds. They didn't sponsor this. They don't know about. Well, they know about it, but it is the work that I did on understanding, developing a hitting model and then doing hitting trends. And the picture is there's a lot more that goes on in baseball than just what you see the 2.5-hour games. And that's my view when we're getting the field ready, maybe at 5-6 hours before the game starts. Okay, so the work motivation is you guys know we got a new manager. Right to that, he's taking a different approach. In the offseason, Nick Kroll had a quote, we want hitters to take an approach of using the whole field, hit line drives, and take good at bats, right? It's maybe a bit of a different perspective than what we've had the last couple of years. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to say, okay, what does it mean quantitatively to take good at bats? We know strikeouts are bad. We know line drives are good, but I wanted to build a model to be more quantitative and say, of all the things that a hitter can do once he makes contact, what might he do as a way to do better toward taking quality at bats? Okay, so this is, I'm going to circle back through this, but this is the summary at the end. To go through this, I did develop a model. The model is in the lower left. It's a little small here in the room, but on the x-axis is observed hits. On the y-axis is predicted hits.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got a model that does that, and the blue is different hitters. And what I've circled is two of the best hitters from last year, Luis Arias, last 2 years batting champion, and then also Bobby Witt. So the blue is an observed, a predicted model. And then what the red dots are, those are the Cincinnati Reds from last year. The 29 Cincinnati Reds, and I'm able to predict it for the league and also be able to predict for teams. Okay, and then the right now is really where I'm trying to use this model is I want to say what the Reds did in 2024, and then talk about what I would project them to do in 2025 if they did things differently. Right, so the baseline, the lefties and the righties hit both about 230. So not 230 for the year. If they were to take an approach where they were to hit grounders to typical infield liners, right? The one thing you're looking at adding like 30 points to your batting average. So not only are line guys good, they are very good. Grounders to favorable zone. This isn't hitting a particularly hard or a great grounder. It's for lefties who would be going the other way some of the time, right? Another 30 points in your batting average, and it's not as big for righties, and I'll talk about why. Then strikeouts to typical grounders, and as I go down, it's less beneficial to the hitter, right? Strikeouts to typical grounders, right? You're now not adding 30 points, you're adding like 15 points, right? And then go down to fly ball to an outfield liner and then a better ground ball. So all this, it's quantitative. And the real thing of this is, you can do things as a hitter to add between 70 and 100 points. And I'll talk about, how these things actually come into play. So I'm developing a model to predict the player hits. That's on the left. And I'm using that with assumptions of what might he do and how often might he do it to quantify good at bats, to get at bats to increase batting average. Okay, so that's a lot. So how do I get there? So the first thing is I took the data from the 2023 season.
Don, can I ask you a question?
You can indeed.
On the front page, so I think your table is saying if we hit grounders that are hard
Yes.
to the right zones, we could go up 100 batting.
So it's more than, yeah, typical, if you can get more liners, grounders to favorable zones, less strikeouts, yeah, it can be like 100 points. Okay, now there's a model in that, and then there's assumptions that go into saying, well, how many times does that all happen? And that's what I'm going to talk about coming up. Yeah, so the first thing is input data, right? And MLB has a lot. There's Baseball Savant. I don't know if you guys have done statistics, you've seen it. It's, you know, it's got every at bat from the season for maybe the last 10, 15 years. This is a summary from the 2023 season. I've got the different hit types for a total of 163,000 at bats. How many hits go with each of those hit types, and then with the averages for those. So 41,777 strikeouts. No hits come out of that, right? That's a lot of things that you don't want to do. Going all the way from strikeouts to pop-ups. Pop-ups are also terrible. I didn't realize how terrible, but you know, pop-ups are also terrible. Ground balls, it depends. Infield liners line drives in general are really good. And I also didn't appreciate how good they were all the way up to fly balls. So this is the data I'm going to use, the model input parameters that I settled on. You know, the hit type matters. I'm sure, you know, whether you hit a line drive or a ground ball matters a lot. Batter stance matters quite a bit. The things that you would think matter certainly on home runs, but they matter on all kinds of hits, which is launch speed and launch angle. Spray angle where you hit it, and then the infield alignment tag also matters. Those are the parameters I'm going to use as, you know, with those inputs, I can say what hit probabilities are then to predict hits.
I have another question.
Sure.
So the data that you're using, they characterize the batter's stance.
Oh, so that's left or right.
Oh, it's just.
Yeah. So the question was batter stance. They'll there's like, I want to say 58 columns, I think, of data. And like some of the ones that I use, it's batter stance, pitcher stance, team, home or away, count is another one, outs, type of hit, launch speed, launch angle. That's all now quantified with, I think, the Trackman system, if I'm saying that right. So all of that is built for every at bat that were done last year.
It's probably Hawkeye now, right?
Hmm?
Probably Hawkeye.
Is it Hawkeye now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just similar,
Okay.
just more, just better.
Yeah. And I did look at, like, you'd look at, and there are mistakes. I didn't see any mistakes in the launch speed, launch angle. I did see some mistakes in hit types. Some of it is still, is not automated. But even the stuff that's not automated, when you look at videos, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, funny, we've got Trackman down here, and yesterday of the 180 variables it picks up per pitch, it just didn't record the horizontal and vertical break on. So I think we have like a bandwidth issue or something.
Yeah.
They were trying to.
Yeah, that's some of the other,
Yeah.
That's some of the, yeah. And I didn't use this, it's more for pitching, but it's like spin rates, I think, or all that stuff on every at bat is quantified and automated. Yeah, not everything, but most of it is automated. So this is now getting into some of the sort of graphically with some of the inputs. The left plot is hits, the right plot is outs. When I'm plotting on the x-axis is launch speed, and when I'm plotting on the y-axis is launch angle. And it's a little bit hard to see, but like the bottom are ground balls, and Excel kind of chokes on this because there's a lot of points. But like the lower left in the gray, you'll see like some more white space. That's ground balls that are more likely to be outs. You go on the right side where it shows the outs, right? It's pretty much filled in gray space. So, you know, more outs than hits, but you'll have some of both. And this is where it gets into be a probability problem, right? You know, anywhere a guy hits it with any speed angle could be an out or could be a hit. but there are probabilities where it's more likely to be a hit or an out. And that's where you get into the quality at bat kind of piece. And then it's hard to see. I'll just go to the very upper end. That's pop-ups. And if you look at the right hand, mouse. Okay, my mouse sort of works. Like the upper, it's sort of filled in yellow. Those are outs. Pop-ups are a lot of outs. Now you can get hits and pop-ups. There's just not very many of them. And if you look on the left-hand side, that's hits. And there's just a few of those. Does that help? Does it still see me?
Is he good on the camera part?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And then fly balls, that's the blue, right? There are fly ball hits. A lot of them are actually home runs. On the right-hand side, there are a lot of fly balls outs. And line drives, that's the green, there's a pretty good mix of both. So these are the kind of things I need to turn into quantitative probabilities that then I can start to use to build a model and do predictions. Okay, this is the other way. I mentioned spray angle is important. This Baseball Savant also has an illustrator. This is for Luis Arias. Left is hit, right is outs. And the one thing you can see on the left, the hits are pretty equal with different spray angles, but you can see on the right for outs, he pulls the ball in the ground quite a bit, right? And there's a great major league hitter that pulls the ball quite a bit. When you pull the ball in the major leagues, infielders are going to be in the right position. It's most likely to be an out. So this is where, now, he can't hit everything the other way, but this is where spraying the ball around some does matter a lot for lefties and toward impacting their hit totals. And again, I want to do this quantitatively, where this is more of a qualitative view. Okay, so now I'm getting into some of the modeling stuff. So this is a complicated chart. I apologize for that, but I'll explain. I'll go through it, and then hopefully it'll start to make sense. So what is on the x-axis is adjusted spray angle, right? So it's plus 45 to minus 45, and this happens to be a lefty hitter. So plus 45 to minus 45. 0 would be a ball hit right up the middle. If you hit it plus 45, it would be a pulled hit, right? So it'd be pulled toward first here. And so that's the x-axis. What I'm showing on the y-axis is of hit probabilities. And this is for all the lefties in 2023, I believe, where I would establish hit probabilities from before. Okay, and the hit probability would go from 0, which would be you would not get a hit. Strikeouts would apply there, all the way up to 1, and that would be like a home run. Once you hit a home run, it's more than likely a hit. Okay, so now I've got these squiggly lines in this x-axis in this plot. The red is for pop-ups, right? And pop-ups are terrible, and that's why they're all around the bottom, close to around 0. Hit probability 0. Okay, the middle one is ground balls. The upper one is infield line drives. Okay, if you look at where the local minimums are, you see spots where they're low. That would be typical positions where infielders would be placed. Okay, so that's where you see local minimums. Let's just do the ground ball, the middle ones, okay? So again, you see pulling the ball for a lefty is pretty bad. Hitting it between the two middle infielders can be pretty good, and then hitting it the other way is exceptionally good. So that's ground balls. And then there's 3 black lines. The middle one here would be a typical launch speed. And the model goes now, I use different launch speeds to then calculate what the launch speed effect is. But the upper and lower would be model predictions plus or minus 10 miles per hour from a typical launch speed. So if you go to the right side for ground balls and you hit it, but if you hit it either to the first baseman or the second baseman, hit probabilities are pretty bad. When you hit it between them, it gets a bit better. When you hit it between them and you hit it hard, it gets again a bit better again. right? So I'm starting to use the data to quantify what I get for launch speed for infield hits. And then the top one is infield line drives. Now, it's also got its 4 local minimums. They're not as severe because when you hit the ball as a line drive, it is less likely for the infielder to get it. And there's 4 local minimums here because I'm talking about low launch angle line drives, like less than maybe 10 degrees, right? If it hits it higher than that, the infielder isn't part of the factor because it's hit over his head. Okay, so that qualitatively makes sense, but I got to quantitatively say what is an infield line drive versus an outfield line drive. So what I did was took the population of line drives, going the wrong way. Okay, still going the wrong way. I took all of the line drives that I showed. Now these are just the outs, and I'm going to say, okay, launch speed and launch angle, like I showed before. But now what I'm going to do is say, of all the line drives that are out, what are the ones in green that are caught by infielders? And that's how I define an infield line drive versus line drives at slightly longer launch angles that were caught by outfielders. And I'm going to call those as outfield line drives. Okay, and I get a surprisingly good demarcation between the two. And that's what I'm going to use to say, okay, I'm going to say this is an infield line drive, and I'm going to use my infield hit probabilities, or it's an outfield line drive, and then I'm going to use my outfield hit probabilities. And I did this because they're very different. I showed you how the infield line drives, maybe I can go back. These are the infield line drives in green. First off, they're pretty good, right? And you see these 4 local minimums. When I go to outfield line drives, you see 3 local minimums, okay, consistent with now outfielders catching these. And you see if it's a outfield line drive and it's hit right at an outfielder, it's pretty poor, right? So you see a pretty big difference between the hit probabilities for outfield line drives. So I'm doing this because I'm trying to figure out, okay, I need to characterize different characteristics of different hits so that now I can build a model that's fully quantitative and not mixing things up that are very different. So then what I do is I take my hit probabilities, and now what I'm doing is I'll calculate hits versus launch speed for all the different hit types. The very top one is the sum. And I've got liners, fly balls, ground balls. I'm able to predict for all the different hit types, for all the different launch speeds, accurately what hits I observed from the 2023 season. So this is like a model check. And symbols are actually the model, and the smooth lines between them, that goes through the observed points. So now I've got something that works for all the different hit types for launch speeds. Okay, so now I'm getting close to now where I can start to do things, right? I got to get a model that I can quantitatively show what I see on the field, then I can start to do things. The next thing is launch angle. And I'm just going to show this for ground balls. What I've now done is taken for the ground balls. I can do it right for launch speeds. Now I'm grouping it. Now I'm trying to see how well, what characteristics go with now just the launch angle. And I've got a launch angle factor on the y-axis. That's where I'm going to modify the hit probabilities from the last one. The launch angle now, ground balls go from minus 50 to about 15 degrees. Okay, and you see trends here. First of all, lefties and righties look about the same, so I'm going to combine them. And if you look at like maybe minus 35 down to minus 20, right? It's pretty flat and it's like around 0.4. So if you hit -30 to -20 degree ground balls, really the launch angle really is not your friend, right? You're hitting it more to the ground. The infielder has time to react to it, right? And he can make the play. And that's where I take the factors before and I'll multiply them by this. As the launch angle starts to get much higher, it makes sense it goes up, but it goes up a lot, right? And it goes up because now you're starting to get round balls that are hit much deeper toward the infielders, and they're actually starting to mix in almost with the infield line drives a little bit, which again, so the big hit problem. So now I can start to use this to say, okay, now I understand launch angle. And then surprisingly to me, less than -35, it starts to go up again. Those are the high choppers. When guys hit it into the ground, it's not in a position where infielders are to make the play. Well, all of a sudden, the launch angle factor starts to go up again. There aren't a lot of those, but when they happen, the hit probabilities do go up a fair amount. So now I'm going to check the model for launch angles, right? And I've got launch angle on the x-axis and then hits on the y-axis. The black is the total. You know, the green to the far right, that is what is the green? Fly balls to the far right, right? You know, and it's, 20 to 40 degrees. That's kind of the optimum for fly balls. You get in the middle, it's line drives. And I do the infield and the outfield separate, and then I just suck them up into the line drives. And then the right is the ground balls, right? And then the black line on the top is the sum of these, and I can get it to work for launch angle pretty well. And though it's hard to see unless I explain the axis, but the far left here, the -40 to 50, it's not zero. It does bump up, and it bumps up really because of the high choppers. There's not a lot of them, but when they happen, the infielders are not in a great position, so they do result in hundreds of hits for the year. So now I've got launch speed, I've got launch angle. I check the model. This is more traditional observed hits on the x-axis, predicted hits on the y-axis. Each point is a different hit type. It's either a lefty or a righty. And it's within each spray angle zone to make sure I'm capturing where they hit the ball accurately for all hit types, for lefties and righties. And then the green are outfield balls, the black are infield. Okay, so now I've got a model that captures it. Now I can do stuff. But it's still, the question is, okay, it works for the whole season, but does it work for individual players? Because individual players, what I don't have in here is things like how fast the player is going to first base. That will matter some. Individual infielder positioning, right? For every player, that's unique. I don't have that in. I don't have pitcher left-handed versus right-handed. That turned out not to be a big factor. So I have things in here, but I don't have everything. So now it's to make it useful to check it with players. And this is one of the plots I showed you earlier. This is for the 2023 season. And when I sum up these hit probabilities, it works. This is the 655 MLB hitters from 2023. This is 163,000 at bats. The predicted total hits as work, as well as it works for individual players.
So your model predicted that Community Freeman and Arias would be the best hitters.
Most hits,
Would
yeah.
have the most
Yeah,
hits.
yep.
And that correlated with reality.
And it correlates with reality.
Very strong.
Over the whole range. And when I see like baseball models, I mean, they're not this is a different way of doing it, but they're also R-squareds.
A heck of an R squared.
It is.
0.99.
But you look at it and it makes sense. Okay, I'll say this. I didn't get here. This is like about 2 years. I didn't get here also by trying a couple things and working. There was probably about, I think I had 15 major model attempts that probably 13 of them failed pretty spectacularly.
So you worked your way up to this R squared. Like,
As measured by your R squared.
And so not even that, it wouldn't work.
And how did you determine it?
So like I would do like this. Let's say I would ignore infield versus outfield line drives. Let's not do a better one. Let's say I ignored lefty versus righty batter stance, right? So I do it and I'd get through it, and then I'd say, okay, I should be able to predict lefties from that, and it just wouldn't work. Like all the lefties would be high and all the righties would be low.
Okay.
It would be things like that. I wouldn't do the spray angle right. So then when I would do it would maybe work for here. It would maybe work for here, but then I'd get to this plot and there'd just be no correlation.
Okay. So
Right.
Like you could measure your R squared and your number of predicted hits against your prediction versus actual.
Before I got to R squared, I would look at these checks and they just wouldn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, they just wouldn't work. And I also built my way up. I started infield hits first. Outfield hits turn out to be a lot more complicated. So I started with infield hit first. I started with I ignored launch angle completely in the beginning. And it worked okay. But then when I tried to do a prediction of so I just did launch speed perfectly well. I ignored launch angle. Launch speed looked perfectly well. Then I went, why do I keep going the wrong way? I know why. Fat fingers. I would do launch speed perfectly well. I'd ignore launch angle. So in fact, this would all be 1. And then I get to this plot and it wouldn't work at all. So that was the building my way up. Okay. So I got it to work for players, but now this is 2023, right? If this works, it should be able to predict other years, right? Because this is somewhat of a consistency check, right? Make sure I'm doing everything right. So the next thing was to take 2024. Now there were different amount of strikeouts that year, which I don't predict strikeouts, but I use that. Hitters started to react to what fielders were doing more. So they started to move the ball around more. Infielders also were moving more. So where they hit the balls changed, but the probability should still be the probabilities.
I think that was attributed to people adopting the shift.
I think not the shift, the
changing.
Yeah, with the rules changing, I think the first year they changed pretty late for last year or 2 years ago. So 2023, I think they were still all figuring it out. 2024, the infielders started to do better, and I think started to figure out that, I mean, for every game, there's a card that infielders have. I don't know if they do this in college. They do this in pros. They have cards of where to stand, right? And I think they were, and what they call now is the shade, which is the middle infielders are close to second. So they're still legal, but they're close to second. There was a lot less shade information before 2023. So I think they were catching up with when we do the shade, how much does that impact what the hitter does? So I think 2023 was still starting to figure that out. After 2023, they had the full off season to really build, statistics of where players stand. I think the players stood a lot more. So I think things changed. So it's 40,673 hits. So 1,000 less hits in 2024 were observed and predicted, right? So now I'm taking a new year. Luis got less hits. He came down, but still predicted. Bobby Witt did quite a bit better that year, a little bit off on the model. So those were the best hitters. But the R squared is still very good. It overall works for most all hitters. So things have changed, but the baseline probabilities that the model uses to predict hits still works pretty well.
I can see your R squared.
It's the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't put it's the same.
Your percentage is still
Yeah.
tight.
I did this in Excel because I was doing this. I did this all in Python, and I was learning Python, and I wanted to learn the Python graphics. So I did this one in the Python graphics. So I did this one in Excel because I got lazy. And I wanted to show the blue is the MLB players. The red is the 29 Reds. And then they also scatter around the line. So I'm going to start to now use this. Well, the next thing I did was said I want to predict batting averages. So this is hits, right? I got to add in, I don't predict strikeouts or home runs, so I add those in. So how much do these predicted hits with those impact batting averages? And I can do batting averages also pretty well. You do need at least 500 at bats. When the at bats gets really low, I'm still off by 10, 15 hits. Well, when you got 50 of them, your batting average, it's just not a big enough database. I do better as the statistics go up, but certainly 500 hits and more, it works pretty well. And I did add in the home runs and the strikeouts to make the batting average, work out right.
I think you had a question.
Ooh,
Did
yeah.
you like think about putting butts in? Because I feel like a guy like Bobby would, like with his speed, probably out like 4 hits.
So, yeah, so I didn't do bunts separate. There's surprisingly not a lot of bunts in the overall season. So I don't think that would have mattered a whole lot. I did think about doing bunts separate, or at least checking how well does this work for bunts. But yeah, I haven't done bunts separate. And speed is another one. Baseball Savant has this thing called projected batting average, and I know they put player speed in. To be honest, I think that's a factor. It's not a big factor because infielders will adjust somewhat. If De La Cruz is coming up, the infielders are going to come up more, right? That doesn't mean De La Cruz won't get more hits with his speed. He's more of an outlier. For the most of the league, I don't think it's as big as a player, as big of a factor. Certainly not as big a factor as where you hit the spray angle, where you hit the ball. To me, that just matters a lot more. Or the launch angle for the type of line drive. Yeah, so I think these things are a lot more significant in what you need to do. Okay,
John, your model are essentially the player points fixed, or they set based on where the players set up on that particular play?
yeah, so the question was like, how much detail do I put in the positioning of the infielders? I thought about that, and I was hoping I really wouldn't have to do that.
Well, I think it's better if you don't. I would think it's better if you use them as just standard position.
So here's what I did. And I could show this. I don't have it in the pitch. I have shade in there as one, and I have standard as the other one. You do see a difference between shade. I'm going to see if I can go back again. You do see a difference between shade and standard. And let me try and show what it is. So you look at this one, I see that big, around plus 15 degrees where I see that big, peak between the middle infielders. And this one is for shade, right? If I do it for the standard, like as a data tag, it moves that middle peak around.
Mhm.
But I didn't go to the extent of saying where are infielders on individual place.
Go back to your one where you've got Bobby Witt for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of a cool, back to Will's point, right? They either were really good at positioning him. Because he should have had more hits.
Well, he's getting more than my model. Yeah, so observed is on the x-axis.
No, it predicts your y-axis. Shouldn't he have had more?
Yeah, so I would say this way. I would predict for Bobby Witt, like he gets 170.
Oh.
And he's getting like 210.
God, well, that could be then it can be a speed then.
So I want to look at Bobby Witt.
There you go.
Bobby Witt is the biggest outlier that I've seen in this that has a lot of hits.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I wonder if it's speed, or I wonder, Bobby Witt is a great ball player. Last year was his breakout year. Yeah. I wonder if they haven't quite caught up to where he's putting the ball yet enough to that So that's a good question. And he's the one that stood out.
If you took your differentials and regressed them on speed,
Yeah.
because you could get a speed
Could you find
variable. I bet you'd explain some of the differential with speed, and that would be interesting all by itself.
It could be. And if there's one thing, I could add infield specific position, but that would be a pain. So I don't want to do that. Speed, I think, would be relatively easy to do. And I think the differentials, or do I see a correlation with speed versus how far off I am?
Sure.
And I thought about that. LaCruz, it wasn't obvious. I think he was on. So was the other one that came to mind.
So he disproved the theory?
I don't say he disproved it. He wasn't an obvious outlier.
But you've also got some luck involved. I mean, there's always going to be, you're going to have guys off the, you're going to have guys fought off the line.
Yep.
I mean, there's got to be some luck factors, right? I mean,
So
That grows.
there certainly is luck factors. Yeah, this is what I thought. I thought about this, like if I got into betting, but I can't because I work for the Reds. It would be, is a guy look like he's off the model because like luck, he's just not dropping, or is there a reason?
Is there a factor?
Right? And if it's off the model and you say there's no reason, it's like, well, if he keeps doing what he's doing, it's probably going to turn it around. Right? But it's not a perfect case. Now the luck comes into play. I think the luck comes in a lot less when you talk about 500 at bats. I think the luck, when you're talking about less than 50 hits, and that's where I would see like my batting average trends would be a lot worse. When it's 50 hits, luck 5 hits, a lot more. I think it gets less likely.
At some point, how age comes into play for the player. Because right now, right, you've got the play, you've got a definition, if you will, of good at bat and a prediction of who takes the most good at bats and therefore how many hits they're likely to get.
Yep.
But eventually, their ability to take a good at bat will diminish with age. I would
Yeah.
think.
I make my guess you pick that up in the exit velocity, right? You lose strength.
Yeah. Because I'm wondering when the prediction, like if you try to predict Luis Arise 3 years from now, will you start to see, he's not, the model is showing his hit totals are gonna
Consistently.
definitely go down.
Yeah.
Produce.
So
Because of the diminishment of that
Yeah.
velocity or whatever it happens to be.
So what my model picks up, as Dave said, my model will pick up launch speed,
Yeah.
right? So my model will pick up things. It won't say if you get older, your launch speed will go down, right? I'm not doing that. But what I am doing is if you do this as a player, I'll give you guys another example that just came to mind. I think I can say this. Joey Votto hit a lot of line drives early on in his career. A lot of line drives, right?
Yep.
He popped up almost never. Pop-ups are like a strikeout, almost. Line drives are, and he walked a lot, right? So he did the things that got on base. As he got later in his career, he struck out more, but he also pulled the ball a lot more on the ground. A lot more on the ground. And I think the model would say, that is the one thing that a lefty cannot do, right, to get a good quantity of hits.
But I'm still curious about this idea of age. Would this model 7 years from now predict that
that's what I'm trying to look, right?
would still be a overproducing, hitter?
Yeah, so I think you need a different thing. You need to say, to Dave's point, like how does launch speed change with age? And if you did that, I've just got like a tag. I say, okay, this is the launch speed that the guy did for the year.
Yeah.
If I want to take those and say minus 10 miles per hour,
Yeah.
like what does that mean? And I can say if that variable change, I can tell you how many hits would go along with that.
I think it's interesting. It's probably 2 different outcomes that you're trying to solve for, right? I mean, one is what's the season look like, and one is what is an individual player gonna do?
So let's get into what I am going to do with the model. We'll see how it does that, right? Because, okay, so now that I've got it batting average, now I can do stuff, right? And now I want to say, okay, I'm a player. There's an infinite number of things that I need to work on, and you can fill my head with all these stats, right? And it's going to be a lot, and I'm just going to I'm going to brain lock, right? So tell me a couple things I could work on. right? And how much is that going to matter if I do those things? That's the direction that I've got. So now that I've got a model, I've got some analysis assumptions. I'm going to say, okay, you're doing this today. If you do something else, what is that something else? So I've defined some new favorable hit conditions, and I'll talk about what those are. Now, this is the second assumption. It doesn't make sense that everything that's good, you're going to do that 100% of the time. So I'm going to arbitrarily say, okay, I'm going to assume as a player, you do this better thing 20% more often, right? Which is maybe it's not 20, but it's a reasonable expectation. And I'm going to do this for 500 total bats for comparison, just because a lot of guys have different bats in the year. And I want to do it where I can show it the same. Okay, so I'm going to take this. I'm going to say, okay, now for the Reds hitters, how much do these things result, these better quality at bats impact their batting averages? And then the next thing I'm going to do is say, okay, the Reds, Terry, when he talked to De La Cruz, he says, I want you to be one of the best players in the game, and I want it to be on the best team. So I'm going to compare these Reds players to the best players in the game. I'm going to compare them to Luis Arias, and I'm going to compare them to Bobby Witt. But that's the metric. Let's see what they got to do to get there. Okay, so this is when I said favorable hit conditions. The 2023 seasons, these are the NLVs, and the upper table, sort of my arrows are say what I'm going to go from to go to. So if you work your way up to the bottom, strikeout, I'm only going to go up like one step in favorable condition. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to take a strikeout and say, well, if you strike out and everyone's a home run, that's really good, right? That would be great, right? But I'm saying, okay, if you're striking out, you probably got there because you got 2 strikes on you to start with, right? So if you got 2 strikes on you, you should be thinking about how do I put the ball in play? And I want to say, put the ball in play with just any kind of average ground ball. It doesn't need to be fancy, but please just put it in play with some kind of average ground ball. Right? How much benefit do you get if you do that?
So do I understand that 20% of the time I'm going to get a 1 level better
Yes.
at bat?
Yes.
And thus my average will go up 15 points, some ish.
So let's get to where it's going to go up. So now I'm showing you, I showed you guys the end. Now I'm showing you how I got there. Right, I got a model, and these are the assumptions that get to the end, right? Strikeouts to ground balls, or ground balls to infield liners, or fly balls to outfield liners. So I'm going to take one step, and I'm going to say, okay, how much better do you get when you do these things? And like for the model, I just plug these things in now, right? I can put in launch speed, I can put in launch angle. Or I can, if it's just an average ground ball, I just say whatever it was for 0 to strikeouts to go to average, and I do that. And now this is where the numbers that I showed you and where they came from. So 500 total at bats, 20% go to the new favorable condition. I've got my baseline, right, which is 115 hits about out of 500. That's the batting average. Now I've taken the model and I say, okay, I'm going to take all the grounders that were hit by lefties or righties by the Reds. And I'm going to say, if you converted 20% of those to a typical infield liner, that's the 15 hits you get extra. And that is the 30 points in batting average. Right? So it's not surprising that infield line drives are good. To me, what I'm trying to build on is how good are they to go from this to go from that, right? And one of the reasons grounders is a really big one is guys hit a lot of grounders, right? If you take something that you hit a lot of it and get a pretty significant jump in average, it's going to make a big difference. So that's just launch angle, right? That's just launch angle. Grounders to favorable zones, right? Righties hitting it the other way. If they hit it the other way, they're hitting it toward first. It's a short throw. That's not as great. If lefties do it, it's not only good, it's as good as hitting more line drives, right? And so this is so again, there's things that they can start to think on. If I got 2 strikes, right? Maybe hitting it the other way a little more often really does make a lot of sense. If you care about 30 points in your average, I would say so. Strikeouts to typical grounders. That is also good, but it's not as good as the other thing, which surprised me for a couple of reasons. We're converting 20% of them. You know, a typical grounder isn't great, but it's still another 10 hits a season for a lefty, right? Then fly balls to outfield liners, those become less. A better ground ball, it's not bad, but again, it's not great. You're adding 5 hits a year. So there are paths that you can take. And if you say, I want to focus on a couple things, this would be what those couple things are. And this is how much benefit you might see. Even if you do a little bit more infield liners and do the grounders to favorable zones, I mean, you're talking 60 points, right? You just do 2 things at 60 points. You do 2 things and throw in the strikeouts, it's like 70 points. This stuff isn't easy, but you need a plan, right? And understand what the infielder knows where you're probably going to hit it. Why aren't you reacting to what the infielder is doing to try and get your situation better? And I'll tell you, there's a lot of focus on infield alignment. There's a lot less focus on teams working on situational hitting. A lot less focus on it. And that's what this is kind of pointing toward, is how important that can be. Back to Terry Francona, right? You know, we want quality at bats. I guess it was Nick Kroll, but yeah. Now I'm going to show you guys just 2 more charts and then I'll be done. So this is now I'm going to compare Luis and Bobby Witt are in green, right? Those are the 2 guys. The yellow is the major league average, right? So in average hits, Ks, and home runs, and then all the reds for last year after that. And this is why I have to start to normalize things to 500 at bats, because everybody's different, right? You can't, 600. Luis and Bobby Witt, 600 at bats. They were healthy and they had great seasons. Most of the Reds were well under that. And then the MLB average is 68,000. So that's why I do this to 500. So this will be my last chart before I summarize. And this one's complicated, but so I'll go through this. So this is the Reds lefties. I've done it to 500 at bats. Luis Arias is the top. The next one is the MLB average. And then what I'm comparing is different hitting statistics that are good or bad, and how they compare. And the colors don't come out great. But if you look at the Reds lefties, home runs scaled to 500, they mostly did pretty well, right? Arias isn't a big home run hitter, so it's easy to go above him.
If they get 20% additional.
No, so this is just this is what they did 2024. Okay. So now this, sorry, I didn't make a good transition. So now this is just, okay, what do you guys do? We know how you get there. Let's just see generically, not what you would do as a team, but what did you do now to say how you might use the table before. So home runs are good. Ks are the next one. Luis had a great year. He had less than 22, but when you scale it to 500, comes up to 22. Average major league lefty struck out 126 times last year. Okay, you took it like where all the Reds are. There's a lot of work to be done, right? For strikeouts, right? Now, this isn't maybe the best way to increase your average, but it's a way that's pretty important, and that's one of the things they talked about. So let me go to liners next. Infield liners and outfield liner. What I'm doing is when I show these 2 numbers, it's like that's the number of hits they got versus how many of those type of hits they got. So let me go to infield liners for a res. It's either 35. The 35 over 49. So Luis did is he had 50 at bat, 50 infield line drives, 35 of them were hits. So This is why you want to hit infield line drives. You know, the lefty average is 711. Luis is right at it, right? If you are hitting infield line drives, I don't even care if it's a hit anymore. Just like hit them, because it's probably going to be a hit if you keep doing it, right? So when I first did this, I just did the numbers, but you can see the hits and the average. And so I've sort of created a scorecard, and sadly, there's not sadly, the reality is, you know, it's tough to get to Luis Arias when it comes to hits. So the Reds got to really focus on some of these categories, getting a little bit more green, and avoiding the ones that are tough to see that are white, where they got to get at least to the major league average for a lot more of their hitters. So I'll end. I do have a model for quality at bat metrics. I've done this for the Reds. I've identified some more better pass, the best pass, the more hits. And this I got a lot of details behind the math. I didn't go into it very much. I'd like to, but most people don't. But that will be in the Baseball Research Journal coming out soon.
What are they linear models, or are you using Logit, Probit, machine learning?
So I've been told I used machine learning. I'm not so sure that's true. I think I used trial and error. What I did for the hit probabilities, what I did is I grouped them into zones, and then I've just got a table lookup for if you hit it in there, what's the probability it'll be a hit if you hit it in that zone. So that's for the baseline hit probabilities. And then I've got a lot of functions like this, like launch angle, where I would look at different ways of doing it. And I'd say, okay, what best captures the trends? And then I would figure that out. So I did it that way. So one guy told me I was doing machine learning. I think it's 2 years of trial and error.
How'd you get your coefficients though? Is that like a linear model then?
So like for this one, I would say is a linear model. Oh, so okay, so for each at bat, I know these parameters. Is he a left? I know the hit type. I know if he's a lefty or righty. I know launch angle. I know all the launch angle, launch speed. So I know all those things, right? And I say, okay, with those, I'm probably not answering your question, though I'm trying to. For those, I know I start with, okay, if it was an average launch speed, launch angle, I calculate the hit probability. And then I've got a functional equation that I say, okay, I know I've got launch speed added in, how much I call them hit adders. Mm-hmm. But what would the hit probability go up for if it's at its launch speed that it is? And then I also then modify that hit probability by launch angle. And then I would just sum up those hit So my coefficients are either looking at what happens in that zone. It's a least squared. It's a linear model. Okay. Yeah. Like my launch speed is a linear model. Yeah, that's the answer. Okay, sorry.
Cool.
I was trying to think.
I got it.
It's a linear model.
I didn't mean to make it that
No. It's a linear model.
Got a question online. How would you go about convincing players to use this information when you couldn't even get them to bunt during shifts?
So it's going to be interesting what Tito does with players when he says he wants quality at bats. It's going to be interesting what the new hitting coach does, right? When he knows that's a focus, and he knows it's a team that struck out a lot, and he knows it's a team that did not hit great for average. So it's I did send this to them, so they have it. It'll be interesting how they perform, and if they don't perform, what happens.
Terry, I don't know his information very much. Does he tend to use the advanced analytics, or is he more old school?
He's a mix. He's a mix. The Reds have a very good analytics organization. The Reds analytics organization is very good at giving information that's useful. But it's mostly based on trends. Like this is like model, this is kind of different. This is like a model. Like if you did this, what would it be? As opposed to they would just, I think, do more trends. So yeah, it'll be interesting how this, the year will be interesting.
Got one more question. Can you show a player
So we bring up
each at bat so Billy Hamilton can see what's bad to hit a fly ball?
I will tell you, fly balls are really bad. The only thing good about fly balls is when they're home runs.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the average of fly balls, and it's like 200, 150. Yeah, the only reason fly balls are good,
Thank you, guys.
yeah, is because a good number of them are home runs. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. That was the last presentation today. Thanks to all our presenters, Daniel, Jen, Russ, Don. Big thanks to David for helping us set everything up and running the slides.